This video is about 5 questions that people tend to over-focus on when asking questions about abusive relationships. Each one of these questions is a logical question to ask, and very many people ask them, but they tend to be things that people over-focus on instead of more useful questions. For each one of these 5 questions, we'll briefly cover why over-focusing on this question is often unhelpful and what would be some better options to focus on. And let's get into it. The first question that people tend to over-focus on when asking questions about abusive relationships is X, Y, or Z behavior that the other person did abusive? You'll also see this as just a question about the whole relationship. Is this an abusive relationship? And on the one hand, of course, this is a normal and logical question to ask if you find yourself in that situation. It's one of the most common things that you'll see online when people are asking questions to other people anonymously. They'll post something that the other person did. They'll say, hey, here's a description of this situation. Here's what happened. Is this abusive? And while this is normal, and for each of these questions, again, they're not unusual questions to ask, it can be very easy to over-focus on this question. Here's a few reasons why. Number one, if you have to ask this question, am I in an abusive relationship or was X, Y, or Z behavior abusive? You probably already have a problem. Just by knowing that you have to ask that question, that tells you that something is wrong. Number two, most of the time when people are asking this question, they already know that the answer is probably yes. In other words, probably yes, this behavior or this relationship was an abusive behavior or relationship. But the reason they're asking isn't because they're actually trying to figure out the answer. It's some other reason. So for example, one common reason, and I have a lot of empathy for this, is that they're almost hoping to find out that the answer isn't yes. In other words, they know this behavior probably is a problem or a red flag, but they really love this person or care about them, or for any other reason, they're looking for some way that hopefully this situation can be saved, or that, this behavior is not what they really are pretty certain already that it is. Maybe they're also just looking for other people to validate what they've seen or to confirm what they're concerned about. And that brings us to the last reason that this can often be an unhelpful question when people over-focus on it, is that asking this question can almost prevent people from moving forward to more helpful questions. Like, it makes them feel like they're talking about it and they're asking a question, but what they really should move on to are more action-oriented or effective questions to ask, and that's what we'll talk about next. So what would be some better questions to ask in this scenario? Number one, should I continue a relationship with this person? Number two, if I had seen this behavior in the first couple days of us dating or being together, would I have continued dating this person? Number three, should I ever under any circumstances get married with this person? Number four, should I ever under any circumstances have a kid with this person or put myself in a situation where it would be possible for me to have a kid with this person? Questions like that are actually more helpful, but they're often less comfortable to have to ask. And of course, if you or somebody that you know are in that situation asking these questions and having this pattern of kind of over-focusing on this question, not moving on to the harder questions, that's very understandable. Like, that's very human. But it does help to sometimes point out what's going on, and that's part of what this video is intended to do. With that said, let's move on to the second big question that people tend to over-focus on when asking questions about an abusive relationship, which is, why am I so, insert adjective here, for getting into a relationship with this person? It could be any version of that adjective. Why am I so dumb? Why am I so stupid? Why didn't I see this coming? Why did I get myself in this position? Any version of that kind of a question. And there's a couple reasons that this question is not that helpful, even though it is, again, very human to ask. Number one reason it's not helpful is that it's focused on the past, and we can't really do anything about the past because it's already happened. And it would be much more helpful to focus on things that we can control, like what should we do about it now that we know that this has happened? Second reason this isn't that helpful of a question is that it kind of assumes something that is not really true, which is that people who have these abusive behaviors or patterns are like really easy to spot from like 100 miles away, and you're just dumb if you didn't notice that someone was like that. And I have a lot of other videos here explaining more about that topic, but basically people who are abusive don't just walk around acting like that all the time, and often they can act very charming and charismatic, and they don't necessarily let those particular behaviors out of the box in the earlier stages of being in a situation with other people, because on some level they know that's going to get them in trouble. So for a variety of reasons, people who are abusive often don't just like give off red flags like every second that you would, notice. And often they can have a lot of good qualities besides the abusive behaviors. So this question, why am I so dumb for not spotting this person, way in advance, kind of assumes that that should be easy, which is not really a true assumption in the first place. And if you over focus on this question, why am I so dumb? Why am I so stupid? Not only is that just kind of like putting yourself down, but it also might not really be true. And it also doesn't really help you do anything about it, to change that situation. So here's what would be two better examples of questions to ask that would be more helpful and positive and action oriented. One would be, how could I learn from this situation for next time? i.e., what steps could I take? What things could I change about my approach to better filter out people like this? Just keep the expectations that you set for yourself realistic. It's not possible, again, just to go around like detecting people who have certain tendencies right away. People are complex and they have many facets, and they don't always show all of the sides of themselves in the first day or week or month, right? But at least that's an action-oriented question about the present or the future that focuses on learning from a mistake or learning from something that happened, rather than just like being upset that it happened or blaming yourself. Another example would be, now that I have this new information that this person does have these behaviors, what should I do about that? Or what steps should I take about that? Notice both of these questions are positive. They are not just putting yourself down. They are actually things you can think about and do, and they're just much more helpful. And that brings us to the third big question that people ask a lot about abusive relationships that tend to be unhelpful if you overfocus on them, which is, what does it say about me in some way as a person that the other person has treated me this way? And there's many variations of this one. For example, why didn't I deserve to be treated better? Or what does it say about how much I'm worth as a person that this person treated me poorly? And if you or someone you know is asking a question like this in the back of your mind, that's very normal. People do this in many situations in life. And this video is not about why these are quote unquote like stupid questions to ask. These are very normal questions to ask. And the reason this question is not that helpful to over focus on is that there's this big assumption or premise behind the question that's just not true. That assumption is that this other person's actions towards you are a measure of your identity or worth as a person. And they're just not. Those actions are their actions. They're more about them and how they got to this point in their life and what's going on in their head than they are about you. And that's just the truth. What would be a more helpful set of questions to ask would be, how biased or unbiased do these persons' perspectives seem to be? Are they maybe having a skewed perspective or an abusive perspective? Another question to ask would be, what would be some better places to get answers to questions about identity or self-worth? And I'm not going to go deeply into this in this video, but that could be valued friends and family who you think don't have a biased or abusive perspective. It could also be internal. There's a lot of other better places to look for input on that kind of a question than somebody who seems to have a pretty skewed and abusive perspective. So that's the third question. And again, if you do find yourself asking some of these questions more than once, that's very human, that's very normal. Just being aware of some of these facts about these questions and some of these helpful shifts that you can make is a great first step. You're not gonna like flip to your total thought process, changing immediately over time. Before I go into the last two questions, I just want to mention that I do have a new channel up that's not just about abusive relationships, but is about life in general and growth and potential and just happy, meaningful life and kind of doing the things that you want to do and enjoying things. And I would love it if people from this channel checked out some of the videos over there. Feel free to go and check that out. I will link that in the description below. With that said, let's go on to number 4. So the fourth question that can be unhelpful to over focus on in an abusive relationship is, how can I change the dynamic of the relationship? The reason people often ask this one is, number one, it's something they can do. and they want to do something about it. Number two, it fits with this idea that the relationship's not just one person, it's multiple people, and maybe it's kind of like an organism or an ecosystem where maybe if you can change the way that you relate towards them, then they'll then change how they relate towards you, and that can lead to this positive cycle where the whole relationship can be fixed or saved, essentially. Here's the reason this one can be very unhelpful to over-focus on in an abusive relationship. In a lot of situations in life, this kind of an approach, looking at your own actions in the system of a group of people's interactions or in two people's interactions, and then looking to yourself to change, actually can have a powerful effect on that situation. The problem with people who have a lot of abusive behaviors specifically is that there's often nothing that you really can do to fundamentally change the dynamic. And the reason is that the problem is often, if there's an abusive person, that it's not just one of these common problems that human situations have. It's not just that there's a communication gap where two people just aren't communicating well. It's not just that two people aren't listening to each other or cooperating well. It's not just that people aren't finding like a win-win solution. It can be deeper than that, and that's what the fifth question in the video is going to talk about more. Just to give a more helpful version for this fourth question of what you could ask would be not how can I change the dynamic of the relationship, but is it even possible to change the dynamic of the relationship with this person? And that brings us to the fifth and final question in the video that can be unhelpful to over-focus on in an abusive relationship. And this one is, how can I help the other person manage their anger better? And even though this is a very normal and reasonable question to ask, here's why it can be very unhelpful to focus on too much in an abusive relationship. Often the problem is way deeper than an anger management problem. To illustrate this, I'm going to use an analogy called the angry racist analogy. Imagine you have someone who is an angry racist. They have racist thoughts, ideas, beliefs, actions, etc. towards, some group of people or groups of people. And this analogy is not about politics at all in any way. It's just to illustrate this idea. And when this person gets angry, they often say a bunch of awful racist stuff and do a bunch of awful racist things. Now, the question is, imagine you have a day when this person is not angry, right? Maybe they just went to the gym and got a massage and had their favorite lunch and they're in a great mood. Is this person, now that they're not angry, suddenly not racist? Did that cure them? Did not having the anger management problem that day fix the underlying problem? And of course the answer is no, they're probably still quite racist. They still have racist thoughts, perspectives, beliefs. They can still say and do racist things. And fixing the anger problem doesn't make any of the racist stuff go away because it comes from a deeper place of their perspectives about certain groups of people in the world or about their role in relationships with certain groups of people, etc. You could make them calm and it won't change those thoughts and behaviors. You could make them sober and it won't change those thoughts and behaviors. And that's the analogy to an abusive relationship, is that often the person who has a seeming anger management problem actually has a very skewed set of perspectives and beliefs about relationships and their role in a relationship, and maybe that person's role with the target of the abusive behavior in the relationship, right? And if they're angry, that might come out more, or if they're not sober, that might come out more, but fixing an anger management problem will not make those perspectives go away. They can still act in abusive ways, say abusive things, even when they're not angry or even when they're sober. And that's why over-focusing on this question about how can I help this person manage their anger is often unhelpful, because it can be a red herring. You can fix that problem. You can fix multiple of these problems that tend to make things worse, but if it doesn't change that underlying set of beliefs and perspectives that are leading to the behavior, the problem may not go away. And a more helpful and more useful version of the question to ask, instead of how can I help this person manage their anger, would be, is this really an anger problem at all? Does this only happen on days when they're really upset? And you could replace this with any other factor like sobriety or any other environmental factor that somebody's pointing at. Imagine that I did fix most of this problem. Would this realistically still keep happening? These can be really hard questions to ask, and I have a lot of empathy for anybody who's having to ask themselves these really tough questions, but these are the right kinds of questions to ask. Thanks for watching. I hope these 5 questions have really helped you. I would love it if you checked out the new channel that I launched that has to do with a broader range of topics, so please feel free to go and check that out in the link below. Have a great rest of the day. Good luck with your situation, and thanks for watching.